Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin. In the beginning, before names were etched onto maps and before the continents wore their familiar faces, there was only the quiet hush of water and stone. The earth was young then, wrapped in steam and stirred by heat, its bones still molten and shifting. But even in that primeval chaos, the oceans were already at work, not roaring with urgency, but flowing with patient purpose. They did not crash down in violence. They whispered, they seeped, they embraced. And the land, still soft in its infancy, responded not with resistance but with a yielding grace. This was the start of the slow dance between ocean and stone, a rhythm that would shape the very edges of our world. Imagine the crust of the earth, not as something solid and still, but as a great raft broken into plates, drifting silently on currents of molten rock. These tectonic plates, immense slabs of ancient crust, move because the Earth's interior pulsed with heat. The oceans, pooling above them, did not just sit still, their weight pressed upon the plates, nudging, balancing, coaxing. Over millions of years, the ocean basins deepened, their floors sinking gently under the burden of water, and along their edges, the continents grew, lifted and crumbled, cracked and carried, not by any sudden force, but by the gentle tug of water and the subtle heaving of heat beneath. Let's drift deeper. Beneath the waves, far below the surface we see, lies a landscape more jagged and alive than any mountain range above. The mid-ocean ridges, long serpentine scars across the seafloor, breathe new crust into the world. Here in the silence of the deep, magma rises like a heartbeat, cools as it touches water, and builds the seafloor inch by inch. As this new crust spreads, it pushes continents apart. This is how the Atlantic Ocean was born, not with a roar, but with a widening breath. Africa and South America once held hands, now they drift, slowly year by year, like lovers who still dream of each other in their sleep. Water seeps into everything. It finds the cracks, it slips into faults, it changes the very minerals of the earth. Ocean water, rich with salts and whispers of ancient rain, reacts with rock deep below the seafloor. These chemical dances soften the crust, weaken the borders, and lubricate the boundaries where plates collide or drift apart. In places where the sea presses against the edge of a continent, sediments gather, grain by grain, shell by shell, until they weigh enough to bend the crust beneath them. Over eons, the weight of these stories, these fossils, these sands and silts, becomes enough to reshape a coastline. And then there is subduction, the slow, invisible act of one plate sliding beneath another, sinking into the mantle. It happens quietly, often beneath the ocean, where the seafloor is pushed down into the deep earth. As it descends, water trapped in the rocks escapes, rising into the hot mantle above and causing it to melt. This melting births volcanoes, not randomly but in lines, like poetry along the rim of the Pacific. These volcanoes rise as islands. Japan, the Aleutians, the Andes, born not from chaos, but from the steady choreography of ocean crust and heat. The continents themselves, those vast bodies of land we now name and know, were never still. They have wandered across the globe, guided by the oceans and the forces beneath. At times they have gathered together into supercontinents like Pangaea, only to be pulled apart again like puzzle pieces longing to reunite. The oceans carve their paths. As water pooled in basins and the tides shifted, as glaciers came and went, the continents responded. Shorelines moved, river mouths shifted, and the edges of nations rose and sank with the slow rhythm of the sea. Even today, the oceans continue to shape the continents, not just with tides and waves, but with their sheer presence. The Atlantic widens by inches each year. The Pacific shrinks. The Himalayas grow taller not from winds or rain, but because India continues its silent northward journey, pushed by a plate that once lay beneath a vanished sea. We walk on ground that floats on water that boils beneath stone. Every step we take is balanced on a dance that began billions of years ago and has never once stopped. And yet we rarely feel it. The movement is too slow, the changes are too wide for our short lives to see. But the evidence is everywhere, in the curved coastlines that match like distant siblings, in the fossils of sea creatures found on mountaintops, in the deep trenches offshore that mark the edge of continents being swallowed back into the earth. All of it tells a story that has no beginning or end, only rhythm, only movement. So when you stand at the shore and look out at the sea, you are seeing more than water. You are seeing the architect of the world. You are watching the sculptor at work, still shaping, still refining, still dreaming the earth into form. The land beneath your feet was touched by ocean hands, weathered, cooled, moulded, and moved. And the sea, for all its gentleness, has never ceased its work. It is not just a body of water, it is a shaper of continents, a keeper of secrets, a whisperer of time. Tonight, as the waves lap gently against the rocks and the stars glimmer faintly above the tide, remember that the continents we call home are not fixed. They are travellers, they are dancers, and it is the ocean, the vast skin partner that leads them through the endless waltz of Earth's becoming. Let's drift deeper into the quiet unfolding of this ancient tale, where oceans do not merely surround continents, they sculpt them from beneath and above, from within and around. Think now of the way water carries memory. Every raindrop that falls upon the highlands eventually finds its way to the sea, carving valleys and canyons as it journeys down. In that slow descent, rivers carry whispers of the mountain, grains of stone, fragments of life, traces of the sky itself. These sediments gather in the ocean's arms, laying down new pages in the Earth's long story. Over time, these layers harden into rock, pushed and folded by tectonic breath, then lifted once again as mountains far from the sea. The continents are not built of the ancient mystery alone, they are rebuilt every day by the soft hand of water. The relationship between oceans and continents is not just movement, it is transformation. Beneath the ocean floor lies the crust, dark and dense, formed from basaltic lava that cools quickly under water's embrace. In contrast, the continents are made of lighter, more buoyant rocks like granite. This difference in weight and composition allows the continents to rise above sea level while the ocean basins sink lower. But it is water that sharpens this contrast. Through erosion and sedimentation, through chemical reactions and the pressure of time, oceans reinforce the boundary between what is sea and what is shore. They do not simply reflect the difference, they define it. Now imagine the warm shallows of an ancient sea millions of years ago, where tiny creatures lived and died and left behind their calcium-rich shells. These organisms, so small, so unassuming, built entire layers of limestone on the ocean floor. Over epochs, these layers thickened, were buried, were heated and pressed into stone. Then in time they were lifted high by the slow collision of plates, becoming cliffs and ridges and even mountain ranges. Some of the most dramatic landforms on Earth were born not from fire, but from the soft white dust of ancient oceans. The land in its stillness carries the voice of vanished waters. There is poetry in the way coastlines evolve. Waves do not simply strike the shore, they study it. They learn its weaknesses, its curves, its grain. With time they smooth the jagged, crumble the mighty, and pull back the loose and wandering. Headlands retreat and bays widen. New land is born where sediment collects, while old land is surrendered where the water wins. It is not destruction, it is collaboration. The ocean shapes the continent not like a storm but like a sculptor, never hurried, never finished. And then there are deltas, those lush fanned fingers where river meets sea. Here fresh water and salt water mingle like old friends, and the sediment carried by the river slows down, settling into soft, rich layers. Over centuries these sediments build up into fertile land, teeming with life. Many of the world's greatest civilizations began on deltas, nurtured by the ocean's generosity, protected by its arms. And yet, deltas are also fragile, always shifting, always at risk of being swallowed again by the sea. They are a meeting place between growth and erosion, creation and surrender. They are where land remembers its water origin. Let's float now toward the concept of isostasy, a gentle balancing act beneath our feet. The Earth's crust, though solid, floats upon the mantle like ice on a lake. Where ice is thick and heavy, it sinks deeper. Where it is thin, it rides high. In the same way, when glaciers melt and their weight is removed from a continent, the land slowly rises, as if taking a long breath. But when sediment from rivers is added to the ocean floor, that floor can sink just a little more. Water and land are not fixed, they are in constant conversation, adjusting, responding, breathing together over geologic time. The ocean may seem endless, but it feels every grain dropped into its depths. And the continents, for all their grandeur, rise and fall with the tide of time. There is also a silence beneath the sea that holds the memory of lost worlds. At the edges of some continents lie submerged shelves, broad shallow stretches that were once dry land during the last ice ages, when sea levels were lower. These continental shelves were once forests and plains, trodden by animals and early humans, lit by sun and cooled by breeze. But as the climate warmed and glaciers melted, the oceans rose and reclaimed them. Today they lie beneath the waves, still shaping how storms behave, how fish migrate, how coastlines evolve. Even the drowned lands remain part of the continent's shape, hidden but not forgotten. And far beneath the waves, in the trenches where plates collide, lie the deepest scars of this ancient dance. The Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, the Puerto Rico Trench, all are born where oceanic crust is pulled downward beneath another plate. These trenches are more than just deep. They are windows into Earth's interior, where rocks bend, melt and return to the mantle. What sinks here may one day rise again, reborn through volcanic arcs and mountain belts. The continents borrow from the sea, and the sea borrows from the land. It is a cycle older than memory, quieter than breath, deeper than sleep. Even the ocean's salinity tells a story of continents. The salt in seawater did not begin in the sea. It was drawn from the rocks of the land, washed away by rain, carried by rivers, and collected by the sea over billions of years. Every droplet of salt water is a distilled memory of Earth's stone, dissolved and transformed. And yet the oceans never grow endlessly saltier. Some of the salt returns to the mantle through subduction, trapped in minerals and carried down with sinking plates. This endless loop of salt and stone and time links the ocean's chemistry to the continent's heart. The sound of the sea on a quiet night, the hush of waves brushing the shore, is more than a lullaby. It is the voice of an ancient sculptor still at work. With every tide, with every storm, with every grain of sand carried or dropped, the shape of the earth is revised. And not just at the edges. Ocean currents influence global winds and rainfall, which in turn shape deserts and forests, snowcaps and savannas. In this way, the ocean's hand reaches even to the heart of the continents, painting them with drought or bloom, sculpting not just their edges, but their soul. So when we think of the continents, we must not imagine them as islands apart from the sea. They are born of water, fed by water, and in time surrendered to it. The sea cradles them, carries them, and when the time is right, reclaims them. The dance continues, fluid and slow, shaped by pressure and patience, by flow and fracture. Oceans do not simply surround continents. They are the breath beneath their bones, the tide beneath their time, the soft, relentless hand that never stops shaping the face of the world. Now let us wander toward the quiet closure of this watery tale, where oceans are no longer only the beginning of land, but its forever companion, its sculptor, its silent keeper of rhythm. Even as continents rise proudly above the sea, they carry in their layers the memory of being born beside water. Sandstone cliffs remember ancient beaches. Fossilized shells rest in mountain stone. There is no part of the land untouched by the sea's story. And as we look closer, we realize that shaping is not only about collision and erosion, it is about time and tenderness. The oceans, vast and seemingly indifferent, are in truth full of memory and intention. They do not rush, they do not forget, they wait and they return, always brushing the edge of the continents, reminding them gently that they were never meant to stand alone. Sometimes the shaping is loud, a quake, a tsunami, a sudden shift of the earth that cracks a coastline or lifts the sea floor. But more often, it's the kind of shaping no eye can catch. A tide rising just one grain farther than yesterday, a current smoothing one stone for one more minute, a glacier melting, sending fresh water into the sea, tilting the balance of salinity, shifting the path of a current, nudging the breath of a storm thousands of miles away. The land does not resist. It listens, it bends, it responds. Over millions of years, this quiet conversation becomes the signature of the Earth's design. A shape crafted not in haste, but in harmony. In the Arctic and Antarctic, we see another part of the story, how cold oceans cradle the poles, how they breathe life into frozen lands. Here, sea ice forms like delicate lace, extending and retreating with the seasons. Beneath it, cold currents sink and flow, pulling oxygen down and bringing nutrients up. This circulation, this deep ocean conveyor belt, feeds the world. It shapes weather, it shapes life, it even shapes where continents hold their snow, how glaciers grow or melt, how sea levels rise or fall. The edges of continents are drawn in part by ice, in part by salt, in part by the rhythm of heat. It is all the ocean's doing, never still, never finished. And what of islands, those smaller fragments of land kissed into being by the ocean? Some rise from volcanoes deep beneath the waves, shaped by underwater eruptions that pile lava upon lava until a summit finally touches air. Others are built from coral, tiny animals that build vast reefs which rise so slowly we mistake them for stillness. These islands, though distant from continents, are part of the same story. They remind us that land is not fixed and the sea is not empty. Everything is in motion. Even the smallest atoll was shaped by the sea's patient hand. Think now of a future far beyond our lifetimes, when today's continents will no longer sit where they do now. Africa will drift northward. Australia may collide with Asia. The Atlantic may widen still, while the Pacific slowly narrows. New mountains will rise. Old coastlines will sink. Cities may be swallowed by the sea, and deserts may touch new oceans. This is not destruction. It is the earth continuing to shape itself, to revise its story, to shift its weight until balance feels right again. And always the oceans will be there, not only as witnesses, but as guides. We might ask then, what does it mean that oceans shape continents? It means that land is not the opposite of water, but its echo. The continents are not static, but in conversation with the deep. That our maps, though useful, are only snapshots, still frames in a long, slow film where nothing ever truly holds still. The earth we walk on today is not finished. It is still becoming. And the oceans, with all their currents and tides, with all their memory and movement, are the ones who teach it how. Even our own lives are shaped by this unseen motion. The minerals in our bones once swam in oceans. The salt on our tongues is the same salt the sea carries. The rain that nourishes our crops came from oceans far away. We live because of oceans, we dream beside them. We return to them again and again, not just for beauty, but because they remind us of something ancient within ourselves, something patient, something fluid, something's always becoming. And so, as this story finds its soft ending, let us remember not just the science, but the feeling. The slow dance between ocean and stone is not over. It moves still in silence beneath our feet and across the tides. The continents shift and we shift with them, even if we do not feel it. It is a lullaby written in currents, a sculpture carved by waves, a poem written not with words, but with water and time. Tonight, if you find yourself near the sea, listen. Listen not for answers, but for rhythm. Let the breath of the waves remind you that the world was not built in haste, that every coastline is a story still unfolding, that the land beneath your feet was shaped by patience, by motion, by the eternal touch of water, and that even now in the quiet dark the ocean is still writing the next line in the poem of the earth. Before rivers had names and valleys bore footprints, the world was a canvas of untouched stone, a quiet sphere cloaked in the breath of sky. The mountains were taller then, sharper, more defiant. The valleys were shallower, the plains rough and raw. And then came the rain, not in violent storms, but in soft, persistent drizzles that fell day after day, century after century. Water found the cracks. Water always finds the cracks. It does not push, it seeps, it lingers, and in its waiting, it works. With time, the stone yielded, just slightly, just enough. The earth listened, softened, and began to change. This was not erosion. This was introduction, the first conversation between rock and water. between permanence and motion. Let us begin in the high places, where raindrops first meet the earth, falling on rugged peaks and tumbling down their faces in thin silver ribbons. These streams are born light and bright, unburdened. But as they descend, they gather, collecting minerals, catching bits of stone, thickening with soil and memory. They cut paths into the mountain, they braid into rivers. They do not rush, they carve. They trace the shape of the land with patient insistence, and with each pass, each season, they go deeper. They turn slopes into valleys, cliffs into canyons, plateaus into steps. They do not ask permission, they simply continue. Consider the canyons, not just the grand, but the hidden ones too. The narrow passageways carved through ancient stone by rivers that never needed to shout. They speak with curves, with winding corridors and layered walls, each stratum a chapter of Earth's long tale. These deep chasms were not born in catastrophe but in patience. In every swirl of sediment carried downstream, in every molecule of water that brushed against stone and whispered, "I'll return." Over time, rivers write the Earth's story not with ink, but with absence, with what they carry away, leaving behind the shape of what once was. Water also smooths. In time, jagged peaks grow soft. Glaciers too are water's hands, frozen, immense, and slow. They gather in high valleys, pressing down with their weight, sliding with ancient strength. As they move, they scrape the bedrock, sculpting U-shaped valleys, fjords, and wide basins. When they melt, they leave behind lakes, kettle holes, and winding ridges of stone and silt. They do not just erase, they rearrange. They take the high and spread it low. They take the solid and make it gentle. What once stood proud becomes a cradle for reflection, a bowl for rain, a mirror for the sky. Imagine the deltas, where rivers finally meet the sea and release their burden. Here, water slows and the story shifts. Instead of carving, it builds. Layer upon layer of silt, clay, and broken shell settles into place. Land is born in the quietest places, not from uplift or eruption, but from sediment finding a place to rest. And still, the river flows on, splitting into threads, braiding across the land like hair in wind. These places, rich, fertile, fragile, are the cradles of civilization. But they are not permanent. They rise with one flood, fall with the next, shaped endlessly by the rhythm of water meeting salt. Even the wind owes its path to water. Evaporation pulls moisture from lakes and oceans, sends it into the air where it cools, condenses, and returns again as rain. This cycle, eternal and invisible, is how water moves from place to place, shaping not only the earth, but life itself. Clouds drift across continents like soft brushstrokes, and each drop they release carries the memory of oceans, mountains, and sun. In this way, even deserts are shaped by water, by its absence, its memory, its occasional gift. The sand dunes are not untouched by rain. They were made possible by it. Let's not forget the underground rivers, the aquifers and seeps that move in darkness. These hidden waters wear down limestone, carve caves, and hollow the earth from within. Stalactites grow drop by drop, not from storms, but from single drips of mineral-rich water. Entire cave systems are created by unseen rivers that take centuries to form a single corridor. Their shaping is not just geological, it is sacred. It is the patient poetry of water finding its way through silence. And yet, despite all its movement, water leaves behind more than absence. It creates places. River valleys become homes. Lakes become centres of life. Water does not merely carve the earth, it invites it to grow. Soil left behind by floods nourish forests and farms. The rhythm of wet and dry teaches roots how to dig deep. Creatures follow the banks of rivers, learning where to nest, where to find food, where to rest. Water's carving is not only for shape, it is for balance, for invitation, for flourishing. Even now, when we think we understand the shape of the world, water continues to shape it. A river changes course, a glacier recedes, a sinkhole opens in a quiet field. The earth listens, it adjusts, and we, walking above it, rarely notice the gentle revisions beneath our feet. But they are always there, always ongoing, always soft and sure. Water, in all its forms, liquid, ice, vapour, never ceases its work. It is the world's most patient artist, the quiet hand behind every hill, every hollow, every rise and fall of land. So the next time you stand beside a stream or feel the pull of a river, or watch rain trail down a window, know that you are seeing more than motion. You're seeing memory. You're seeing the force that carved the world, not in violence but in rhythm. And you are standing on land that was once water's dream, shaped grain by grain, curve by curve, into the earth we now call home. Let us move further along the river of time, flowing gently through the pages of Earth's memory, where water continues its quiet work, not only in carving valleys and canyons, but in weaving together entire landscapes like a loom threads a tapestry. To understand how water carved the world is to recognize its dual role, as both artist and architect, as both sculptor and seed bearer. Now, picture the great alluvial plains, flat expanses of land built not by lifting rock, but by laying it down, bit by bit, through floods and overflows. These wide open lands did not erupt into existence, they were poured like watercolour across the earth. It is in these places that water whispered a promise to life. I will return, and I will bring with me everything you need. And true to its word, water came back again and again, each time leaving behind another layer of richness, another thread in the vast cloth of the continent. As we drift across time, let us descend once more into the story of glaciers, not merely as frozen rivers, but as memory made solid. Each glacier carries within its belly the snow of 1,000 winters, compressed into ice laced with ancient air, holding the breath of ages past. When these massive bodies move, they press into the bedrock, grind it down, and carry the fragments for miles. As they retreat, they scatter these stones like breadcrumbs across the landscape, creating moraines, drumlins, eskers, and kettle lakes. The very texture of northern continents, Canada, Scandinavia, the Highlands of Scotland, owes its quiet softness to these ancient ice rivers. The sharpest peaks were once softened by their passage, and the gentlest valleys were deepened by their cold caress. And beneath them, meltwater streamed unseen, carving channels in silence, sometimes creating vast floodways that would only be revealed much later when forests had grown over them. But glaciers are not the only force water uses to shape the land. Consider karst landscapes, where rain and groundwater slowly dissolve limestone, dolomite, and gypsum, leaving behind underground mazes of caves and sinkholes. These places feel otherworldly, filled with chambers of glittering mineral drips, reflecting pools and hollow echoes. and yet they are not born from sudden change. They are carved by the steady acidity of water mingling with carbon dioxide from the air and soil. This carbonic acid, though weak, is persistent. It carves cathedrals beneath our feet, making underground rivers that hum softly through the silence. Here, water is both creator and explorer, always finding a way forward, even when surrounded by stone. Now turn your eyes to the coastal cliffs, where the land meets the sea in a jagged handshake. These cliffs were not born sharp. They became so through relentless waves that struck the rock, not like fists, but like breathing. Wave after wave, they smoothed the stone, wore away the weaker layers, and left behind the arches and stacks we now see as monuments to time. Sea caves were formed where the waves found a fault line, a crack, a whisper of weakness, and followed it inward, sculpting hidden rooms with watery fingers. Every coastline on earth is a letter from the sea, written with foam and tide and carried by moonlight. Even now, the edges of every continent are being rewritten with each new wave. And what of the deserts? What of the places where water seems long gone? Even there, water has left its mark. Dry riverbeds, called wadis or arroyos, twist across sandy lands like faded memories. Flash floods, brief furious moments of water's return can reshape these landscapes in hours, carving gullies, stacking stones, and rearranging the surface with chaotic elegance. The buttes and mesas of the American Southwest, towering and alone, are the remnants of high plateaus slowly worn away by wind and rain, by runoff and freeze-thaw. Water may be rare in these regions, but its legacy is vast. Even absence is a form of carving. Let us wander now to where water and gravity become partners in shaping the land. Landslides and mudflows may seem sudden, but they are often the result of long, slow saturation. Water creeping into the soil, loosening it, loosening the bonds that hold the earth in place. One day, a slope holds firm, the next it flows. The shape of the hillside is changed forever, and yet even this is part of the process. Water does not always create gently, but even its abrupt gestures are part of its artistry, and above all we must remember the floodplains, those broad, fertile valleys that carry both the gift and risk of water's abundance. Here, rivers overflow their banks not to destroy, but to renew. The Nile, the Ganges, the Mississippi, all have spread their blessings through annual floods that bring fresh sediment, recharge aquifers, and fertilize the land. Life along these plains is shaped by expectation and rhythm, by the knowledge that the river will rise and fall, that land must yield and recover. These are not places built in defiance of water, but in partnership with it. Even volcanic landscapes owe something to water. In places where groundwater meets magma, steam eruptions can blast open craters, forming calderas and geysers, reshaping the surface in an instant. Over time, water finds its way into cracks and pores of volcanic rock, weathering it slowly, turning lava fields into soil that can hold life. What was once fire becomes garden. What was once desolation becomes home. This too is water's work, reclaiming, restoring, renewing. So we see that water does not only carve in one direction, it erodes and deposits, removes and builds. It sculpts and then paints. It creates emptiness and then fills it with meaning. Each act of carving is also an act of invitation, for plants to root, for animals to gather, for humans to settle. The rivers and glaciers, the rains and tides, do not only shape geology, they shape possibility. They trace the boundaries of what can grow, what can gather, what can be. Even our cities, our roads, our cultures follow the blue threads left by water's hand. And through it all, there is no hurry. Water works at the pace of time itself, brushing against stone with eternal calm, never doubting that shape will come. It teaches us, without words, the value of patience, the strength of softness, the power of persistence. It shows us that to change the world, one does not always need force. Only return, only rhythm, only presence. Water returns again and again, and each return leaves behind a mark, a curve, a possibility. So let the rain fall where it may, let the rivers wander, let the glaciers slide and melt, let the sea rise and recede. In every motion the world is being shaped, not just in form but in meaning, and we who walk upon the land are part of that shaping too, born of water, moved by it, drawn to its edges, shaped in its image. As we move gently toward the closing reflections of this story, we find ourselves walking not on the surface of stone but on the memory of water. Every hill, every valley, every soft bend in the land is a quiet echo of water's passing. And though it may seem now that the rivers have carved all they can, that the glaciers have retreated for good, that the coastlines are settled, and the lakes have found their final shape, this is only the illusion of stillness. The carving continues as it always has, with the same patience, the same calm, the same enduring grace. Water is not finished. It never will be. It does not sculpt for applause. It sculpts because it must, because it is in its nature to move and to shape as it moves. In the farthest corners of the earth, where rivers still cut through untouched forest, or where rainfall trickles down ancient stone untouched by cities, the work continues. Water follows the same laws it did 1 billion years ago. Gravity still pulls it downward. Heat still lifts it skyward. Cold still freezes it into crystals that grow in silence and then release their grip in spring. Each raindrop falling today is part of the same story as the floods that carved our oldest valleys. The earth still listens to the language of water, even if we do not always hear it. And so the carving persists, even in quiet places, even in forgotten corners. The story of water carving the world is not only geological, it is deeply personal. We too are shaped by water, not only in our physical forms, which are made mostly of it, but in our lives, our paths, our choices. We build homes near water, we follow rivers with roads, we plant where the soil is soft from old floods, we gather where lakes reflect the sky. We go to the sea when we are tired, when we seek peace, when we long to remember something older than words. Water carves not only the earth, it carves the soul gently, persistently, making space within us for stillness, for reflection, for change. And the carving is not always visible. Sometimes it is a process of quiet preparation. A raindrop falls on a hillside and nothing moves. But that drop seeps into the soil, loosens a grain of sand, which then shifts another, until one day, years later, the hillside gives way and reshapes itself. The same is true in our lives. Water teaches us that change does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it begins with a single shift, a softening, a moment of stillness before movement. Sometimes we are being reshaped and do not yet know it. In every culture, water is sacred, not only because it gives life, but because it transforms. It blesses the child, cleanses the body, honours the dead. It marks beginnings and endings. It flows through our ceremonies, our songs, our prayers. And perhaps this reverence exists because we sense deep in our bones that water understands time better than we do, that it has seen the rise and fall of mountains, the bloom and fading of civilizations, the dance of continents drifting like leaves across the face of the earth, that it carries within it the shape of the world and the memory of all who have walked upon it. Even as the climate shifts and glaciers melt, as rivers dry and seas rise, water continues to carve. But now it carves in new ways. It floods places that were once dry. It leaves dry the places once green. It reshapes not only stone, but the way we live, the places we call home. And though these changes may feel sharp, even frightening, they are not foreign. They are part of the same old story. Water moving, responding, sculpting. The world is being rewritten, not by a new force, but by the oldest one of all. Let us imagine for a moment a future long beyond us, when our cities are ruins and our names forgotten, but the rivers still flow. A child of that distant age may stand in a canyon and wonder who first walked its edge. They may find the stone carved with soft curves and imagine a giant hand sculpting the walls. And they will not be wrong. A giant did pass this way, a giant made of droplets and meltwater, of tide and trickle, of patience and pressure. A sculptor whose tools were time and gravity, whose medium was earth itself. And so the world is never finished. The carving continues slowly, endlessly, in the dripping of rain onto roof and leaf, in the gentle bend of a creek around a mossy stone, in the silent work of aquifers beneath the ground, in the rising of mists at dawn. Every moment water is shaping something, and even when we cannot see it, it is smoothing the sharpness, deepening the shallow, softening the hard. It is teaching the world how to change without breaking. To know this is to walk more gently, to see a puddle not as an inconvenience but as part of a grand process, to hear the rain and know it is speaking to the land, to stand by a river and feel not just its movement but its memory, its intention. To recognize that we too are being carved, not into weakness, but into form, not into loss, but into space for new growth. So let the rivers continue their work. Let the tides rise and fall. Let the rain find its way into the cracks of stone and the corners of hearts. Let the world be shaped, slowly, quietly, beautifully. For in every drop of water there is a sculptor at work, and in every shape water leaves behind there is the mark of time, the hand of nature, the memory of motion. When water carved the world, it did not do so with violence, it did so with grace, and it still does, even now, even here, even in the silence. Long ago, when the world was a single breath of stone, the continents slept together in a quiet cradle called Pangaea. They fit like puzzle pieces not yet scattered, pressed close by time and fire. There were no distant shores, no vast oceans between them, just one land, one sea, one pulse beneath the crust. But even then, beneath that ancient unity, something was stirring. The tide, soft and eternal, had already begun their whisper. They brushed against the coastlines with gentle persistence, tugging not with violence but with rhythm. And over millennia they would pull, stretch and widen the seas, quietly drawing the lands apart with nothing more than patience. The force behind this tender pull comes from the moon, a pale companion circling Earth, never too far, never too close. Its gravity reaches down, and even now, stirring the oceans like a spoon in a cosmic cup. It raises the tides on Earth not in sudden jerks, but in long, slow sighs, lifting the water toward it and letting it fall away again. These tidal movements are not just poetry, they are power. As the earth turns and the moon dances above, the oceans heave in response, and the energy of that endless motion seeps into the crust itself. The tides pull at everything, at rock, at water, at the invisible fabric of the planet's spin. Imagine the early oceans, smaller than now, locked inside the boundaries of a still whole continent. Yet even in that closeness, the moon was already shaping the rhythm of the earth. Tides washed over lowlands, retreated, returned. The friction between land and sea, between water and time, began to wear at the edges. As tectonic forces pushed beneath, the tides amplified the motion, nudging plates apart with each rise and fall. Slowly, cracks formed, oceans widened, continents began their drift, not with a single break, but with a slow, deliberate parting, like a sigh stretched across 1 billion years. Let's pause and look beneath the sea, where mid-ocean ridges still hum with creation. These underwater mountain chains are the quiet birthplaces of ocean floors, where molten rock rises from the mantle, cools and spreads. As the seafloor grows, it pushes the continents outward. This process, seafloor spreading, is fueled by the Earth's inner heat, but it is shaped by the ocean above. The tides, ever in motion, guide the pressures, stir the sediments, and help regulate the crust's slow unravelling. The Atlantic Ocean, once no more than a crack, was widened by this interplay, by magma from below and tides from above, working in quiet collaboration. And as the ocean widened, the continents began to change, not just in position, but in soul. As South America drifted westward and Africa moved east, their climates shifted. Rain patterns wandered, winds adjusted. Life evolved to fit these new realities. Mountains formed along the new edges, shaped by the force of collisions at the other side. But still, at the heart of it, the tides persisted. The same waves that lap gently against the beaches today are part of the same motion that drew these great landmasses apart. The moon, with its constant gaze, never stopped pulling, and Earth, always listening, continued to respond. There's beauty in knowing that something so gentle could move something so immense. The tides are not loud, they do not crash endlessly like storms, they move in quiet rhythm, always returning, always softening. But across the ages, their effect is profound. They keep the oceans in motion. They stir warm and cold waters together. They help maintain the tilt of Earth's axis, and they add their subtle strength to the tectonic dance, where plates shift, boundaries grow, and continents find new places to rest. Even today, the continents are still moving, still drifting. Australia is headed north, slowly inching toward Asia. The Atlantic grows a few centimeters wider every year. The Pacific, ancient and vast, shrinks by the same amount. The tides continue to rise and fall, carving estuaries, shaping deltas, pulling at underwater ridges, guiding the flow of sediments. They do not cause earthquakes or build mountains directly, but they are part of the chorus. They keep the beat. They help Earth breathe. When you stand on a shore and watch the tide come in, you're watching this ancient force in motion. It is the same motion that once pulled India across the sea and drove it into Asia, giving birth to the Himalayas. It is the same rhythm that opened up the Red Sea, split continents, and gave room for oceans to grow. It is the lull of gravity, the sigh of distance, the breath of planetary longing. The continents did not simply drift, They were drawn, beckoned by the moon's soft hand, shaped by the sea's patient fingers. And so the tides that drew the lands apart did so with no urgency. They simply continued. They moved the water, and the water moved the earth. The continents followed, slow as sleep, drifting like leaves on a vast blue pond. And still they drift, still they respond to that ancient call, still they are sculpted by waves that rise not to conquer, but to remind. This is not just geology, it is poetry in motion. It is a lullaby that never ends, and it is happening even now, beneath your feet, around your ankles, in the hush of each returning wave. Let us float now through the deeper tides of time, where the moon's pull remains steady and the ocean never forgets. It is not just the continents that drift, but the energy within them, reshaped endlessly by a silent gravity that knows no rest. As the continents moved apart, the world changed, not only in shape but in balance. Oceans flowed into new basins, altered their currents, adjusted their salinity, shifted their weight. And with every new configuration of land and sea, life itself adapted. All of it, forests and deserts, winds and rains, creatures of land and deep, responded to the slow reordering that began when tides first coaxed the continents apart. Picture the Indian subcontinent long before it wore the shape we know today. It was once a lonely traveller, separated from Gondwana, sailing northward across the vast Tethys Ocean. This motion was not violent, not abrupt. It was steady, urged on by the quiet processes beneath the sea floor and the rhythm of waters above. The tides did not shove India forward, but they kept the ocean moving around it, distributing sediments, influencing heat, fueling circulation that helped drive plate motion from below. And when India finally collided with Asia, the earth lifted the Himalayas skyward, a monument not only to collision, but to all that preceded it: the moon's whisper, the ocean's sway, the long drift through time. The mid-ocean ridges, still active today, continue to open the earth like a slow sigh, pushing land apart even as they form new seafloor. The ridges do not act alone. Above them, tides continually shift the weight of water across the planet, ever so slightly influencing stress, triggering minor changes that ripple down through the crust. Over millions of years, these ripples become movement, and movement becomes geography. The tides serve as the heartbeat of this system, not loud, not forceful, but rhythmic and necessary. Consider now the ancient shorelines buried far beneath today's seas. These ghost coasts mark the place where continents once ended, long before the tides pulled them farther apart. In some places, these hidden shelves stretch hundreds of miles, submerged when sea levels rose, drowned not by storms, but by time. And even now, the tides wash over them daily, continuing to shape what is already beneath. They push and pull sediments, sculpt underwater dunes, guide the currents that carry warmth to the poles and life to the deep. The Earth's hidden history is not still. It moves with every tide. In the South Atlantic, where Africa and South America once touched, a delicate mirror remains in the curves of their coastlines. If you trace the western bulge of Africa and the eastern indent of South America, you see the story written there, a record of separation etched in stone. The Atlantic Ocean between them, though vast, is young in geological time. Its tides, which now sweep from pole to pole, are new travellers. They carry echoes of the parting, reminders that continents were not always so far from one another, And as the ocean grows, the tides grow bolder, shaping new coasts, deepening trenches, feeding the winds that cradle the equator and fuel the storm. We often think of the moon as distant, silent, passive, but it is a companion whose presence stirs the very fabric of the earth. Its pull does more than move water. It slows Earth's rotation, gently stretching the days. It influences the balance of energy between crust and mantle, and through the tides it generates, it adds a soft pulse to every tectonic beat. The separation of the continents is not a single event, it is a long, unfolding rhythm, guided by the moon's invisible touch and echoed in the waves that return each night. When the tides draw back, they leave more than wet sand. They leave clues, lines of driftwood, salt marks, patterns of foam, stories written and erased in cycles. These are small stories perhaps, but they mirror the grander narrative. Continents drifting, oceans growing, the planet never pausing in its gentle transformation. Even coral reefs follow the tides, growing where the moon allows light and water to meet in perfect rhythm. Mangroves lean into tidal zones, their roots embracing the boundary where land greets sea. Life listens to the moon too, just as the earth does. Let us drift now to the Pacific, immense and ancient, rimmed by fire and change. Here the plates do not simply spread, they dive, collide, and reshape the continents with fierce intention. But even this restless region is swayed by tides. In subtle ways, the rise and fall of water loads and unloads pressure on faults, nudging them toward movement, encouraging release. In this way, even earthquakes, though not caused by tides, may sometimes be timed by them. Like actors cued by the soft drawing of a curtain. It is not the ocean that causes the stage to shift, but the ocean holds the rhythm, the breath, the weight. And in the Arctic, where tides weave beneath floating ice and shallow shelves, the process is slower, more delicate. Yet the story is the same. The sea moves, the land listens. Over millennia, ice retreats and returns. Sea levels fall and rise. Tides circulate the chill, mixing waters that shape the breath of winter across continents. Here too, the shape of the land, the pattern of islands, the depth of fjords, the tilt of frozen plains, is guided by the same ancient rhythm that began with the parting of Pangaea. Even our daily lives, so distant from geological time, are marked by the tides. Harbours rise and fall, ships wait or sail depending on the moon's lean. The shape of coastlines we draw on maps is only a momentary truth. With every tide it changes, if only a little. But add 1,000 years, 10,000 more, and the change is no longer small. Beaches become cliffs, bays fill in, islands are swallowed or born, and the continents themselves continue to drift, slowly, steadily, patiently. So let us not think of the continents as broken pieces scattered by accident. They are dancers in a slow waltz, guided by gravity, moved by the deep currents of the earth, and led always by the rhythm of the tides. They did not crash apart, they were called apart, and that calling continues still. It is in the salt of the sea, the shape of the wind, the slope of the mountain. It is in the motion of tectonic plates and the murmur of rising waves. It is in the stars reflected in tidal pools, in the curve of a bay, in the distance between one homeland and another.
The tides that drew the lands apart are not just history. They are present. They are now, and they are still drawing.
Now let us rest in the quiet pull of the tides, in the space between where the land ends and the sea begins, where something ancient still moves, slowly persistently, beautifully. The continents, those mighty shelves of stone beneath our feet, do not sit still. They are travellers in a silent ballet drifting apart in response to forces that never sleep. And yet, this parting has never been cruel. It has been guided by the soft hands of water and time, by the gravity of the moon, by the hush of tides that rise and fall in endless devotion. As we come to the close of this chapter, we must understand that Earth's geography is not a static picture. It is a living, breathing journey, and the tides are both its clock and its lullaby. Even now, the Atlantic Ocean opens a little wider each year, not with cracks or thunder, but with imperceptible shifts beneath the waves. The continents continue to drift, obeying the rhythm first set in motion long before humans ever drew maps or named the seas. This drift, powered partly by internal heat, is guided at the edges by the sway of the oceans above. Tides stir sediments and shift water masses, altering how heat is distributed, how pressure builds in the crust, how plates respond beneath the weight. And with each gentle rise and fall of the tide, the world becomes just slightly new again. Imagine a shoreline on the west coast of Africa, where waves curl softly onto the sand. Just across the sea, on the mirrored edge of South America, the same tide moves toward the shore. The water has crossed an entire ocean, guided by the same lunar pull. Between these two lands lies not emptiness, but memory, the memory of unity, the echo of the time when these two coasts once touched. The tide that moves between them today is the same tide that once washed across a single continent, before it slowly let go and allowed the world to stretch wide. And what does it mean, this parting of lands? It means that separation is not always an end, but a transformation. When the continents pulled apart, new oceans formed, and with them came new life. Species evolved in isolation. Climates changed. Currents circle the globe in new patterns, carrying warmth, feeding coral reefs, guiding migrations. The splitting of the earth allowed it to breathe differently, to create anew, to explore its own potential. And the tides were there for every moment of that journey, not leading, not forcing, but supporting, nurturing, reminding. Tides are not just movements of water, they are echoes of gravity made visible. They are the way the moon speaks to Earth, and Earth responds not with words but with motion. The energy of that conversation does not disappear. It flows through the oceans, transfers into the crust, and becomes part of the dance of the continents themselves. Over eons, even a whisper can move a mountain, and the tides are full of whispers. There are places today where the movement is visible, like a slow breath drawn in stone. In Iceland, where the mid-Atlantic ridge rises above the ocean, new land is born between plates. The continents there are still parting inch by inch as magma fills the gap and pushes the edges outward. The tides lap at the newborn shorelines, smoothing them as soon as they rise. In East Africa, a rift valley stretches and deepens, hinting at a future ocean not yet born. Water pools in the lowest places, testing the shape of what might come, and above it all the moon continues to pull, guiding the water, guiding the earth. The moon is receding from us, drifting slowly away at the rate of just over 3 centimeters each year. And as it does, the tides lose a fraction of their strength. The days grow a breath longer. The rhythm slows, but it does not stop. The connection between earth and moon, between tide and continent, remains strong. It is not the strength of force, it is the strength of constancy. It is the promise that even the gentlest motions sustained over time can change the shape of a planet. When we look at the stars, we see light that has travelled great distances to reach us. When we look at the ocean, we see motion that has travelled great time to shape us. The sea is not a still body. It is always moving, always speaking, always tracing the story of how the world came to be. Every coastline is a sentence in that story. Every estuary, every peninsula, every submerged shelf is a letter shaped by time and tide. And the continents, though they may seem permanent to us, are chapters still being written. Perhaps that the most comforting truth in all of this is that movement and change do not have to be loud to be meaningful. The continents did not break apart in anger. They drifted, they listened to the sea, they let go when it was time, and in that letting go, the earth grew into something more beautiful, more diverse, more alive. The parting was not a loss, it was a beginning. So tonight, as the tide returns to the shore, as the moon rises above the trees, as the world turns once more on its quiet axis, remember that the ground beneath you is still moving, not with urgency, not with fear, but with purpose, with rhythm, with grace. The continents are still dancing, still listening to the tide, still finding new shapes beneath the stars. And we who walk upon them are part of that dance. We are held by the same forces, shaped by the same rhythm. We are, each of us, beings of drift and tide, of patience and pull. The world beneath us is not still, it is becoming. And the tides, ever faithful, ever gentle, are the hands that help draw it forward. Beneath the ocean blow the flickering dance of sunlight, and far past the reach of the deepest diver's breath, there exists a realm of silence and shadow. It is a world where no storm ever roars, where no sky ever opens, where time feels slow and ancient. The seafloor, often thought of as a flat and lifeless plain, is in truth a landscape of wonders. Valleys deeper than mountains are tall, plains broader than deserts, ridges longer than any river, and within this quiet, cold world the earth speaks in whispers. These are not whispers of sound, but of movement, of heat, of unseen life that pulses beneath layers of rock and sediment. The whispers beneath the seafloor are gentle, patient, and they shape the very bones of the planet. Imagine standing, if one could, on the abyssal plain, a flat, dark stretch of seafloor that stretches for miles without end. Above you, the weight of miles of water presses down, turning every sound into stillness. But below your feet, the earth is alive. The crust here is thin, broken into plates that rest on a deeper sea of molten rock. Through tiny cracks, heat rises, not in bursts but in sighs. Hydrothermal vents, those strange chimneys of the deep, release warm mineral-rich water into the freezing blackness, creating towers of stone and clouds of life where none should exist. Around these vents, life thrives not on sunlight but on chemistry. Bacteria feed on minerals, and in turn they feed entire ecosystems, tube worms, clams, crabs and more, creatures that never see the surface yet flourish in the warmth of the earth's breath. These vents are more than curiosities, they are part of the earth's way of breathing. When tectonic plates move apart, magma rises to fill the space. As it cools, it forms new ocean crust. This process happens quietly, over vast stretches of time, at places like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and the East Pacific Rise. The seafloor is not a static sheet. It is born and reborn through these spreading centres, where the earth remakes itself in near stillness. Each inch of crust beneath the sea was once molten rock, now cooled, now drifting away from its birthplace. And within that rock, water seeps. It finds the tiniest of pathways moving through cracks and pores, reacting with minerals, carrying heat, whispering through the crust as it transforms both itself and the stone around it. Let's drift now to the subduction zones, where one plate slides beneath another and returns to the deep mantle. These are the trenches, long, narrow wounds in the seafloor, hidden beneath the ocean's darkest cloaks. Here the crust bends downward, sinking into the earth not with drama, but with inevitability. As it descends, it carries water with it, water locked in minerals, in pores, in sediments. That water is not lost. It changes the chemistry of the mantle, lowers melting points, triggers the formation of magma, and that magma, someday, may rise again in a volcano, or form mountains on a distant shore. The seafloor, even as it disappears into the depths, becomes part of something new. There are places on the ocean floor where the crust is not uniform, where fragments of older continents rest like forgotten memories. These microplates, these seamounts, these ancient blocks drift and jostle, pushed by forces no human hand can guide. Earthquakes rumble in the deep, not with the roar we feel on land, but with low, rolling vibrations that travel far. These quakes are the seafloor's voice, its way of adjusting, shifting, sighing. They mark the movement of the plates, the bending of rock, the release of built-up tension. And though they rarely reach the surface, they are part of the same story that shapes the mountains and trenches, the coasts and islands. Too a part of the whisper. Over millennia, particles drift down from above, dust from continents, ash from volcanoes, shells of tiny creatures that lived and died in the upper ocean. These fall slowly like snowflakes and settle into soft layers on the seafloor. Over time, those layers thicken, harden, and become rock. They preserve the history of the ocean, its temperatures, its life, its currents. A single core sample pulled from the deep can reveal the story of millions of years. It is a book written not in ink, but in silence. A journal of whispers that only the patient can hear. Even the magnetic field of the earth is recorded here. As lava cools at the spreading centres, the minerals within align with the planet's magnetic field. And because that field changes over time, flipping north to south and back again, the seafloor becomes a striped record of Earth's magnetism. These stripes, invisible from above, stretch for thousands of miles, mirroring each other on either side of the ridges. They are proof of the slow drift, the continuous creation of crust, the breath of the planet captured in stone. The oceanic crust is young compared to that of the continents. It is born, moves, and is destroyed in cycles of a few 100 million years. In contrast, parts of the continental crust are billions of years old. But the youth of the ocean floor does not make it less important. It is the place where change begins, where motion starts. The continents may stand tall, but it is the seafloor that carries them, shifts them, rearranges them. The continents are the face of the earth, but the seafloor is its pulse. And beneath it all, beneath the ridges and plains, the vents and sediments, there is the mantle, a vast layer of hot rock that moves so slowly we might mistake it for stillness. But it moves, and in its movement, it drives the plates above. Convection currents rise and fall like the breath of sleep, guiding the continents, widening the oceans, pushing and pulling in a dance that never ends. This deep movement is the quietest whisper of all. It is the murmur of heat, the echo of creation, the memory of when the earth was young and full of fire. So as we listen closely to the seafloor, we begin to understand that silence is not emptiness. It is fullness in another language. The ocean floor is not a dead place. It is alive with whispers of heat, of water, of motion. It speaks not in shouts, but in layers, in temperatures, in currents, in tiny earthquakes and drifting shells. And through these whispers, it shapes the world above, even as it remains unseen. The earth listens, and in time so do we. Drift with me now further beneath the waves, deeper into the quiet rhythm of the earth's oldest thoughts, where the whispers beneath the seafloor stretch beyond minerals and magma and into the story of life itself. For the seafloor is not just stone and sediment. It is the cradle of beginnings, the foundation upon which ancient life clung and grew in the absence of sunlight, long before there were forests or flying creatures or coral reefs glittering in the shallows. Here, beneath pressure and darkness, life found a way not through photosynthesis, but through chemosynthesis, where heat and chemistry replaced the sun, and black vents gave rise to strange and wondrous forms. In these hydrothermal gardens, bacteria feed on hydrogen sulfide and methane, transforming them into energy. They form the base of entire ecosystems unseen by most of the world, but no less vibrant. Tube worms with plumes red like old roses have no mouths and no stomachs. Instead, they host symbiotic bacteria within their tissues. Giant clams and ghostly shrimp gather in these dark oases, where temperatures can swing wildly between near freezing and searing heat. But life adapts. In the whispers of the vents, there is creation, not chaos. These life forms are not accidents. They are testaments to resilience, born in places no one expected to thrive. But these vent fields are not fixed. They shift with the crust. They bloom where the heat flows, then fall silent as the seafloor moves on. Like forests, they age, decline and vanish, leaving behind empty chimneys, mineral husks, and the DNA of creatures that once lived there. The seafloor remembers them in layers, records their presence in trace elements and fossilized fragments. Even in their silence, they continue to whisper. Elsewhere, beneath the sediment and beyond the vent fields, lies the deep biosphere, a world of microbes that live within the crust itself. These tiny organisms are so few in number, so spread out across immense distances, that their world is one of patience and endurance. They feed on molecules slowly leached from rock, and they move not in days or weeks, but in centuries. Some may go dormant for millennia, waiting for a crack, a change in temperature, a breath of fluid to awaken them again. This life too whispers, not in abundance but in survival. It reminds us that the earth lives not just on its surface but in its depths, quietly, deeply, enduringly. Let us pause here to feel the temperature gradient beneath the seafloor. Just a few meters below the surface of the sediment, the world begins to warm, not rapidly, not sharply, but with the slow confidence of internal fire. At several kilometers down, the rock begins to soften. Heat pulses outward from the mantle, but water acts as both carrier and buffer. It moves through faults and fractures, absorbs minerals, exchanges elements, then emerges again, altered and altering. These hydrothermal flows are part of the Earth's circulatory system, linking ridge to trench, shallow crust to deep rock. They transport heat, they shape the chemistry of the ocean, they sculpt the crust from within. And in these heated flows lie the origins of many of the metals we rely on today. Copper, gold, silver, zinc all precipitate from hydrothermal fluids that emerge from the seafloor. They gather around vent fields, forming deposits that someday may be mined, though doing so may disturb ecosystems still barely understood. The whispers beneath the seafloor speak in wealth too, in the slow gathering of elements that will one day find their way into circuits, satellites, tools and art. Even our technologies are echoes of these ancient chemical stories. Deeper still lie the tectonic secrets. Hidden faults transform boundaries and fracture zones where plates slide past one another like drifting ice flows in a vast unseen ocean. These are not the dramatic convergences that raise mountains or birth volcanoes, but silent movers that grind and creep along the planet's surface. They rarely quake with force. Instead, they groan, shift, and bend the crust with subtle tension. They release their energy slowly, in tremors that ripple across sediment, in pulses that reshape the seafloor's texture. The Earth murmurs here in frequencies so low that only the deepest instruments can hear. Above these places, sediments accumulate in endless drifts, carried from distant shores, from dust storms that cross deserts, from microscopic plankton that bloomed and died and settled. These particles rain down in scents, their descent undisturbed by the weather or wave. Over time, they compress into ooze, then into shale, then into the very rock that forms tomorrow's foundation. Within these layers, we find the record of climate shifts, of mass extinctions, of subtle changes in ocean chemistry that ripple through history. The seafloor is not merely the floor of the ocean, it is a library of time, and every layer is a page. At the boundaries of oceanic and continental crusts, we find accretionary wedges, bulging formations built as sediments are scraped off descending plates and smeared upward like thick paint. These zones are messy, chaotic, folded and fractured, but they hold stories of both ocean and land. They remind us that the continents themselves are not separate from the seafloor. They are built by it, fed by it, shaped in part by the materials the ocean brings to their edges. Even the tallest peaks often begin in the deepest trenches. And what of methane clathrates, those icy structures that trap methane beneath layers of sediment in the cold deep sea? They are whispers of gas, frozen into fragile lattices, waiting in stillness. Some see them as potential fuel. Others fear their sudden release could shift the climate. But for now, they remain quiet. Reminders that energy, danger, and balance all lie beneath the surface, bundled in delicate forms that only the ocean can hold. So as we drift through this hidden realm, we begin to understand that the seafloor is not silent. It is full of voices, quiet, slow, patient, but powerful. It does not erupt with colour like coral reefs. It does not roar with storms like the surface sea. But it moves, it speaks, it remembers, and the world above is shaped by what happens far below. Mountains rise because crust sinks. Oceans change because heat moves. Life evolves because minerals flow. And through it all, the seafloor continues its endless conversation with the mantle, with the ocean, with time. These whispers are not heard with ears. They are felt through study, through reflection, through attention to the smallest signals. And in listening, we come closer to understanding the Earth not just as rock and water, but as a living, breathing entity, one that speaks softly and only to those willing to hear. Let us now return gently to the closing layers of this quiet realm beneath the sea, where the last whispers drift slowly upward through stone and sediment, like warmth rising from an old fire. The sea floor, though hidden and hushed, is not the end of the world. It is its foundation, and through all its subtle motion, it has never stopped shaping what lies above. Continents ride on plates that begin and end in the deep. Weather patterns depend on the temperatures the ocean floor helps distribute. Currents flow in part because the crust breathes heat into the sea. Even the air we breathe, the balance of gases in our sky, is in some small way tied to the chemistry that stirs beneath miles of water. The whispers beneath the seafloor may not reach the surface in noise, but their meaning ripples through the whole of Earth's being. There is peace in knowing that something so hidden can still have such power. The mid-ocean ridges continue to spread, pushing continents apart grain by grain, barely faster than fingernails grow. Yet over time, this gentle process reshapes the globe. Mountains rise from old trenches, islands bloom above hot spots, ocean basins widen and sink, sediments shift and settle. The surface of our planet is a story being slowly rewritten by the work of heat, gravity, and the endless seep of seawater into fractured stone. It is not chaos, it is choreography. Even the oldest parts of the seafloor, the dark, cool crust near trenches that's hundreds of millions of years old, has a role to play. As it sinks back into the mantle through subduction, it carries with it not just rock, but memory. The sediments laid down by ancient rains, the remains of creatures that lived in distant ages, the magnetism frozen into basalt by an ancient sky, the chemical fingerprints of seawater absorbed into mineral veins. All of it descends slowly, not lost, but transformed. In the furnace below, that material melts, mixes, and may someday rise again, perhaps as a volcano, perhaps as new crust, perhaps as a quiet swelling of the deep-sea floor. This endless recycling is not wasteful, it is sacred. The Earth does not discard, it reuses, revises, restores. Even destruction, an earthquake, a subduction, a collapse, is not final, is the beginning of something else. The whispers beneath the seafloor remind us that change is not only constant but essential. Without these movements, without this silent shifting of rock and fluid, Earth would grow still, and stillness is not life. Life is movement, even the softest kind. As the ocean basin evolves, so too does the ocean itself. The depth and shape of the seafloor affect how currents move, how heat travels, how nutrients circulate. When ridges rise, they redirect the water above. When trenches open, they swallow sediment and change the tilt of coastlines. These slow alterations ripple upward into ecosystems, influencing where fish migrate, where corals grow, where storms strengthen or weaken. In this way, the seafloor is a silent partner to life, always guiding, always adjusting, always shaping without asking to be seen. Sometimes the seafloor rises up, not gently but with sudden force. Underwater earthquakes, often unnoticed by us, can shake the sea and trigger tsunamis that cross oceans. These waves, born of a single pulse in the deep, carry immense energy to distant shores. And though rare, they are reminders that the deep still stirs. that the silence below can become a voice when balance shifts. Yet even these disruptions are part of the larger harmony, part of the earth adjusting itself, breathing deeper, finding a new stillness after movement. At the same time, the deep remains full of mysteries. We have mapped only a fraction of the ocean floor. Vast ridges, trenches and plains remain unnamed. Creatures swim there that have never seen a ray of sunlight. Ecosystems thrive in chemical baths at temperatures that would scald most life. There are mountains taller than anything above sea level, hidden beneath miles of water, their peaks untouched by human eye. Each new exploration reveals more, but the seafloor is in no hurry to give up its secrets. It shares slowly, in whispers, in hints, in layers of bayends that take time to understand. The seafloor in many ways reflects the soul of Earth. It is quiet, but not empty. It is ancient, but never old. It is shaped by forces that do not need to be seen to be real. It teaches us patience, teaches us to trust that the deepest work often happens in darkness, in pressure, in quiet places where no applause is heard. And in this truth, there is comfort. Because we too are shaped in silence. Our thoughts, our dreams, our growth, they often begin where no one sees, beneath the surface deep within. As we rise from this journey, from these whispers in the deep, let us not forget what we have felt. The earth is not only what we walk upon, it is what lies beneath us, miles of stone, of water, of warmth, and of stories we have only begun to understand. The next time you stand at the shore and gaze out over the sea, remember what rests beneath. Remember the vents, the faults, the slow breath of the mantle. Remember the quiet life clinging to chimneys of black stone. Remember the minerals forming drop by drop in darkness. Remember the layers building, shifting and whispering. And know that the seafloor will continue to move, to shape, to speak long after we are gone. It does not need witnesses. It does not need names. It only needs time, and time, like the tide, will always return. So let the sea cover it gently. Let the darkness remain, not as a shroud, but as a cradle. Let the whispers continue. They are the song of the earth becoming itself, again and again, beneath the weight of water and the hush of ages. Far beneath the highest peaks, long before any mountaintop brushed the clouds, there was only the sea, wide, ancient, and impossibly deep. The earth, in its earliest breath, knew nothing of mountains. It was soft in places, cracked in others, its crust floating upon molten currents like drifting leaves upon a hidden lake. But even then, the deep held secrets. The ocean floor was not idle. It shifted and cracked and whispered under pressure, laying the groundwork for something far grander than anyone could yet imagine. In those deep dark places where plates converged and magma stirred, the slow rising of the world had already begun. To understand how mountains rise, we must first listen to the deep. The ocean floor is the stage where continents begin their long ascent, not in the silence of stillness, but in the slow crash of plates moving into one another. Subduction zones are where one slab of Earth's crust slides beneath another, sinking into the mantle and pulling the edge of a continent downward. But the story doesn't end in descent. As one plate dives, it drags water and sediment deep into the earth. This water lowers the melting point of rock, allowing magma to rise, and above this rising heat, the land begins to swell, to crumple, to lift. The deep, in giving up its breath, teaches the surface to rise. Imagine now the Himalayas, not just the visible peaks, but the invisible forces beneath them. These mountains were not formed by the snapping of stone, but by a long, slow pressure, the result of India moving northward and pressing into Asia. The seafloor between them vanished, swallowed by the trench. In its place rose the tallest mountains on Earth, born not from volcanic fire, but from the folding and thickening of continental crust. The ocean had to disappear so the peaks could rise. Beneath every snow-covered summit lies the memory of vanished seas, their weight and water forever written into the stone. And so it goes across the world. The Andes, tall and jagged, rise beside the Pacific Ocean where the Nazca Plate slides beneath South America. There the deep sends up both heat and force. Some of that energy forms volcanoes, like Cotopaxi, like Aconcagua, but much of it simply lifts the crust, squeezing it upward, folding it like soft paper pressed between palms. Even the Alps, the Rockies, the Atlas Mountains, all owe their height to deep interactions between oceanic and continental plates. The Earth rises not out of nothing, but from the push and pull of its deepest places. But mountains are not only shaped by what lies beneath, they are sculpted too by the water that once lay above them. Many mountain ranges were once seafloors themselves, filled with sediment and shell, with limestone formed from coral reefs now sitting thousands of meters above sea level. If you were to pick up a rock at the peak of Everest, you might find fossils of sea creatures, long extinct, that lived in warm, shallow oceans. How strange and beautiful it is that the highest places on Earth began beneath the lowest waters, that what once swam in sunlight now rests above the clouds. The crust of the Earth is not fixed. It flows very slowly, like syrup on a tilted plate. When thickened, it rises. When stretched, it sinks. The mountain ranges are thick roots deep into the mantle, and their height is supported by this invisible foundation. As the crust collides and compresses, it floats higher, and the pressure from below ensures that nothing rises alone. For every peak above, there is a deep root below. The mountains teach us that growth does not begin at the surface, it begins in the unseen. The oceans contribute in quieter ways too. The weight of water presses on oceanic crust, helping it to sink when cold and dense. This sinking draws nearby plates towards subduction zones, creating collisions that lift the continents. Water also weathers the rising peaks. Rainfall carves valleys, glaciers grind slopes, rivers carry sediment away. And as that sediment travels downstream, it returns to the sea, settling into basins that may one day be lifted once more. In this way, the deep does not only teach mountains to rise, it teaches them to fall, to erode, to return, and from that return comes new possibility. Even volcanoes born at sea, like those in island arcs, can rise into mountains. Japan, the Philippines, the Aleutians, all stand on land formed where oceanic crust sinks and melts and remakes itself. These islands are young mountains shaped not by continental collision, but by the dialogue between deep trenches and rising magma. And just as surely, they too erode, grow, shift and evolve. A mountain, after all, is not a thing, it is a process. Let us consider the concept of isostasy, the balance of weight between the crust and the mantle below. When heavy glaciers form atop mountains, their weight pushes the land down. When the ice melts, the crust rebounds, lifting slowly back towards the sky. Even long after the ice has vanished, the land continues to rise, trying to find its equilibrium. In this way, mountains are not only raised by force, they are lifted by memory, by the removal of burden, by the return to balance. The deep does not forget. It remembers the weight of water, of ice, of time, and it lifts accordingly. There are places in the world where the land is still rising quietly year after year. Scandinavia continues to rebound from the last ice age. The Himalayas grow taller each year as India pushes north. The Pacific Plate drags island chains into new positions, lifting coral reefs into jagged limestone cliffs. The earth is not done moving. The deep is not done teaching. Every motion is slow but certain. Every whisper is heard if we listen long enough. And so we begin to see the mountain not as the sudden miracle, but as the patient result of deep processes unfolding beneath our notice. Every ridge, every crag, every towering summit is a message from below. The earth has risen there for a reason, not to challenge the sky, but to express the memory of movement, of collision, of water turned to stone, of stone turned to height. The deep is not quiet because it is empty. It is quiet because it is wise. And the mountains are its voice made visible. When you look at a mountain, know that you are not seeing just height. You are seeing depth. You are seeing pressure that has found release. You are seeing the memory of the ocean transformed into the promise of the sky. And in that transformation there is peace, there is purpose, there is the soft, endless unfolding of earth, becoming more than it was, through time, through weight, through wonder. Now let us go deeper, not into the height of mountains, but into their memory, into the slow, vast workings of the earth that sculpt them not as monuments of stone, but as unfolding stories written across time. Mountains are not just the result of violent crashes or molten eruptions. They are the slow breath of the planet, exhaled through layers of sediment, pressure, and uplift. For every towering peak that kisses the cold sky, there are millions of years of slenderness beneath it. Tectonic solents, volcanic solents, the silence of deep oceans that once rested where cliffs now stand. These silences become the bones of mountains. These long-forgotten moments of stillness and subtle movement are what truly teach the earth how to rise. Take a moment to consider the mountain chains that do not roar, but stretch softly across continents. The Appalachians, the Urals, the remnants of long-past collisions. These are not young peaks, they are old, worn and low, yet they tell stories just as powerful as the Himalayas or Andes. Once they were high and sharp, now after eons of wind, rain and ice, they have softened into rounded hills, gentle ridges, green valleys. But beneath their surface lies the same deep memory, the same thickened crust, the same ancient roots sunk far into the mantle, the same echo of seafloors long gone. Even in their wear, they teach us that to rise is not only to be tall, but to endure. It is not only the collision of continents that makes mountains rise, it is also the rise of mantle plumes, deep hot columns of material that push upward from near the Earth's core. These plumes do not rush. They swell slowly, lifting the crust from below, thinning it, arching it upward. In places like East Africa, where the continent is splitting along the Great Rift Valley, we can see how the deep breath of heat creates uplift, even without crashing plates. Here the land is slowly rising, stretching, fracturing. Volcanoes emerge, lakes form. Mountains are born not in violence but in stretching, in the gentle separation that makes space for new elevation. The ocean plays its part too, not only in creating pressure from water and sediment, but in fueling cycles that affect global temperature and glacial growth. When glaciers form on mountain ranges, they add immense weight to the crust. This causes the land beneath it to sink, compressing the deep crust into denser material. When the glaciers melt, as they did at the end of the last ice age, the land rebounds, rising slowly, sometimes for tens of thousands of years. This process, known as post-glacial rebound, is still happening today. In places like Canada and Northern Europe, the land continues to lift centimetre by centimetre in response to a weight that disappeared long ago. The deep does not forget. It simply waits for the burden to lift, and then it responds. And in responding, it teaches the mountains to rise again, not suddenly, but faithfully. Over time, this uplift reshapes rivers, redirects drainage basins, changes ecosystems. A mountain's rise is not only upward, it's outward. It pushes against the air, affects weather, collects snow, feeds rivers, nourishes soil downstream. In this way, the lessons of the deep are not isolated. They ripple outward, connecting peak to plain, highland to valley, ice to sea. Consider now the immense pressures that transform rock deep within the crust. As sediment accumulates and is buried, it compacts into sandstone, shale, limestone. And as those rocks sink further, whether through burial, subduction, or crustal thickening, they are altered by heat and pressure. Shale becomes slate, limestone becomes marble, sandstone becomes quartzite. These metamorphic rocks are often exposed in mountain ranges, uplifted and revealed through erosion. They are the record of what once lay far below. They are the voice of the deep, made visible in the folds and patterns of stone. And it is not only Earth's crust that participates in this uplift. The atmosphere above also plays a role. As continents rise, they cool. Higher elevations bring colder air, which in turn affects climate. Some mountain ranges become barriers, redirecting winds, forcing moisture to rise, condense, and fall as rain or snow. This creates distinct weather patterns, unique ecosystems, isolated pockets of life that evolve differently on either side of the range. In this way, mountains create worlds. They become homes, not just to stone and snow, but to forests, animals, cultures, and all of it. Every tree, every drop of rain, every footstep is connected back to the movement of deep rock, to the unseen swell beneath the crust. Mountains, though steady in our eyes, are constantly being revised. They erode under wind and rain. Their slopes crumble, landslides reshape valleys, earthquakes break open faults, glaciers carve them like tools, and yet even as they wear down, they rise. Because as material is stripped from their peaks, the crust below lifts in response. This dynamic balance between erosion and uplift ensures that mountains, even while aging, remain part of the living earth. Their rising is not finished, it is continuous. Deep within these mountains are often found the veins of metal, gold, silver, copper, iron, formed by hydrothermal fluids circulating through fractures. These fluids rise from depth heated by magma, carrying dissolved minerals that later precipitate into rich deposits. In this sense, the wealth we seek in mountains is also a gift from the deep, a whisper of heat and chemistry that travelled upward, paused, and left behind its trace. The deep teaches mountains to rise, but it also leaves them messages, ores, crystals, fossils, folds, stories. Even earthquakes, which we often fear, are part of this grand lesson. They release energy built up by slow motion. They reset stresses. They mark the friction between plates. But they also show us where the deep is still active. where plates press, where rock resists, where movement is inevitable. In mountainous regions, earthquakes are signs that uplift continues, that the story is still unfolding. They are not interruptions, they are punctuation marks in Earth's long sentence. And through it all, the mountains remind us that height is not separate from depth. Every summit began in silence. Every ridge once rested beneath water or beneath other rock. Every sheer cliff was once a layer on the seafloor or a fold within the crust. Nothing rises without history, nothing stands tall without pressure, and nothing reaches the sky without first listening to the call from below. So when we gaze at mountains, when we walk their slopes or trace their silhouettes against the stars, we are not just admiring their beauty, we are hearing the voice of the deep. We are seeing the patience of the mantle, the balance of crust and pressure, the soft guidance of time. We are standing upon memory, layers of it, piles of it, lifted upward so that we might remember where it all began. Let us now come gently to the end of this mountain story, not as an ending in time, but as a pause in the slow breathing of the earth, a soft resting point in the long rise of stone. Mountains, after all, do not begin or end like stories on a page. They rise, fall, and rise again. They are made not of chapters, but of cycles. They remember oceans that are no longer here. They echo collisions that happened before life ever crawled onto land. And they look forward, not with intention but with certainty, to futures where they will crumble, erode, sink, and perhaps be born once more. Their height is temporary, their becoming is eternal. The deep taught them to rise, and in time it will teach them to fall with just as much grace. Even as we walk their slopes today, the mountains are still in motion. The Himalayas lift higher each year, moved by the quiet force of India's slow push. In the Andes, uplift and erosion happen in delicate balance, with rainfall carrying grains of ancient rock to the sea, even as magma swells beneath. In Alaska, subduction zones lift entire coastlines. In East Africa, the continent stretches and cracks, raising ridges that will one day become isolated peaks. Nothing is still, not truly. Even the oldest ranges, worn down to rolling hills, continue to respond to deep pressures, to isostatic rebound, to the shifting of mass beneath them. The earth is always listening to itself, and when it listens, it moves. This movement is rarely seen in the moment. It is not the kind that startles the eye. It is a movement best measured by time and patience, by the thickness of sediment layers, by the tilt of strata in a cliff face, by the orientation of crystals deep in metamorphic stone. These are the traces left behind by rising land. And while a mountain may seem permanent in our lifetimes, it is, in geological terms, a whisper, a gesture, a brief reach toward the sky before returning to the ground below. And when they return, mountains do not vanish. They become the seeds of the next rise. Their eroded sediment travels rivers to the ocean. There it settles, compacts, and eventually becomes part of new crust. When tectonic forces shift once more, those layers may be lifted again, becoming the foothills of some future range. In this way, mountains are not just shaped by the deep, they become the deep and then rise again. They are Earth's memory in motion, its oldest language written in stone. This cycle extends to life as well. The rise of mountains creates habitats. It divides populations, forces adaptation, fosters evolution. Mountain chains become cradles of biodiversity, home to plants and animals found nowhere else. As the land lifts, climates shift, clouds rise, rainfall patterns change, rivers are born or redirected. The very act of uplift reshapes entire ecosystems, inviting new forms of life into being. And as those ecosystems grow, they in turn shape the land. Roots breaking stone, forests collecting moisture, animals carving paths. Mountains rise because the earth moves, but they endure because life takes root upon them. Even our human stories are drawn toward the peaks. We build shrines on mountaintops, trace borders along their ridges, find solitude in their silence. We speak of climbing mountains not only as physical acts, but as metaphors for struggle, for growth, for elevation of the spirit. There is something in us that recognizes the mountain not just as a feature of geography, but as a mirror of the inner world, the patience required to ascend it, the humility it demands, the perspective it offers. All of it echoes the deep processes that brought it into being. And in the end, perhaps that is the mountain's greatest teaching, that height is not a goal, but a process, that nothing rises without struggle, without time, without unseen preparation, that every summit began in darkness, in heat, in slow pressure, that what appears immovable is always quietly becoming. Mountains do not announce their growth. They do not ask to be admired. They simply rise, shaped by forces they do not control, until their form is visible, until their presence becomes part of the horizon. And when they are worn away, they do not mourn. They return to the rivers, to the sea, to the mantle. Their stones become sand, their cores become the seeds of new height. The cycle begins again. The deep breathes, the plates shift, the crust responds, and slowly, softly another mountain rises. Always there is the rhythm, always there is the quiet hand of the earth, lifting, folding, shaping. So the next time you see a mountain, let it remind you not just of scale or beauty, but of process. Let it remind you that strength does not come from force alone, but from endurance, that the greatest heights are built from quiet foundations, that what seems solid is, in truth, only a moment of stillness in a world that is always moving. The deep taught mountains to rise, and the mountains, in turn, teach us to listen, to time, to sense, to pressure, to patience, to the whispering forces that shape not only the earth beneath our feet, but the very course of who we become. And as the light fades from the sky and the peaks fade into silhouette, know this: the earth is still breathing, the deep is still speaking, and somewhere beneath water and rock another mountain is learning how to rise.